definitely. So, my name is Jon Romano, and I've been practicing Buddhism since about 2011. I was in my early 20s is when I got into it. And one of the differences is I got into Buddhism while I was in prison, you know? Yeah, so yeah, I was locked up at the age of 16, and it was just kind of one of those things where um, religion can be kind of a big thing in jail and in prisons. We see that in TV and movies a lot. And it is kind of true because when your material goods have been taken away from you, a lot of people are left looking for answers in the spiritual goods. And so I did what a lot of guys did. Like I kind of start going to church and bouncing around different ideas about God, the world, religion, philosophy. And eventually it led me to Buddhism, which I really resonated with.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I guess I never. I've actually haven't spoken to too many people who've been in prison, or I haven't had conversations with their experience or about their experience. So yeah, you kind of are. I guess you're kind of stripped from a lot of your daily, what's the word, luxuries. So you kind of, I guess, kind of dive into yourself or the meaning of reality in that experience, huh?
Yeah, that can definitely be a lot of people. I mean, I think a lot of people, when you get into jail or prison, it's a chaotic world. And at first, especially, like I said, I was 16. I was just kind of like, oh, this might be my reality for a while. And I got kind of caught up into prison politics a little bit. But eventually, I think a lot of people, you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, as they say. And I wanted something more. I wanted something deeper. I wanted to find meaning and purpose, not just in the prison that I was surrounded by, but by the universe as its whole, which might sound really like grandiose, but I think that's what a lot of us are looking for, is kind of a connection with the universe as a whole. And so that's what really started my journey.
Wow. What was it about? Right before we started recording, you had mentioned, I think it was Zen Buddhism. Was there any in particular practice or school that intrigued you, or was there something that pulled you into Buddhism that you found more exciting in the beginning that got you there?
Yeah. So in 2007, actually, my mom sent me this book, and it was called We Are All Doing Time by Bo Lozoff. And it's a book specifically written for people in prison. And it's a book that's kind of like an eclectic mix of religions, philosophies. But it was the first time I was introduced to anything from the East, really. Buddhism, yoga, Hinduism. And I'll be honest, like at first I looked at the book and I was kind of like, this is interesting, but it's not for me, right? Like if I try to sit for more than 2 seconds, my brain is going crazy. Meditation will never work for me, right? But eventually, as the years went on and I was just looking for something more, as I said, and what attracted me to Zen specifically was because I was in prison, it really depended on prison outreach. And there was actually a Zen monastery. It's actually called Zen Mountain Monastery in New York that does a lot of prison outreach. And it sends free Buddhist literature along with, they set you up with like a little pen pal, and the pen pal wasn't so much of a personal level, but they were just there to answer any questions that you may have about Buddhism or Zen in particular. So that's why a lot of my introduction and early studies were specifically with Zen.
Wow. So it was that outreach that kind of happened to be there maybe serendipitously, and that kind of pulled you into it.
Yeah, exactly. As I'm, beginning to look into Buddhism and everything a little bit, and my mom had sent me that book that I finally started to read, and I started to try to practice, and I'm kind of like, oof, but there's so many unanswered questions,
Yeah.
and being in prison, it's not like I could just like Google something or look it up or whatever.
Holy crap, yeah.
So yeah, eventually just talking with different prisoners who were locked up with me, eventually somebody was like, oh, Donnie's into Buddhism. And so I was like, finally tracked down Donnie and talked to him. And that's when he told me about Zen Mountain Monastery and their prison outreach program.
Wow. That's awesome. That's so cool. I didn't even know that. I mean, I've heard of some different programs. I know there's a very famous movie called The Dhamma Brothers. Anybody listening should definitely check that out. That's a really very interesting story of how they took Vipassana meditation into, I think it was an Alabama state prison, where it's very highly Christian population there, and the effects it had. And I remember one of the stats I was listening to yesterday. I was listening to a TED talk about it. It was like 30% decrease in violent outbursts with the prisoners who took part of that. And so, yeah, it definitely has major effects, and that's something that I think has also drawn me to my practice, is just seeing how it's affected my own life. You know, there have been changes that are very apparent, and it really gives you a new grip on your experience that is being human, you know, being in this human body, in samsara, as the Buddhists like to call it. So, wonderful. Yeah. Let's see. So, I figure we can touch up briefly on it if you'd like. We talked about this before, and I've seen you mention it on your TikTok. But in the past, you went to prison for a specific reason. Do you want to talk quickly about that, or anything you'd like to share about it, just so the viewers can kind of know your background?
Yeah, because obviously when people hear somebody went to prison, they want to know why. That's completely understandable. And I absolutely hate who I once was. I hate the person I once was, because at 16 years old, I did the worst thing you can think about. Um, I'll just say real briefly, I took my pain and suffering out on other people that I blamed for it, even though they weren't to blame for it. I went into my high school with a gun, and yeah, I wanted to spread my own pain and suffering and cause them pain and suffering, which I did. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured or killed, but yeah, I spent 17 years in prison for what I did. And I'll also throw in there that I speak with a lot of law enforcement, mental health specialists, and school officials today around the country about how can we prevent others from doing what I once did.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so much to say that. First off, I mean, I appreciate you speaking about it. I know it must be difficult. I think that for those who don't know, Jon is really big on reform, as far as helping, I would say, people who were in his, or excuse me, who are in the position he was once in, to change their own minds to not do what he did, so to speak. And I think that in the society we live in, a lot of us like to look at, I would call them the symptoms of an issue when there's actually a cause. And it seems that Jon has really put a lot of his energy now into focusing on how to fix the cause. And that's why I follow you on TikTok. That's why I like to hear from you, and I would like to be friends with you, because I know that you have love and kindness within you that has been developed over time. And I think a lot of people in today's day and age are dealing with really tough situations, and as well 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is, I think it's just important to focus on how can we fix these issues. Yeah, I know that people want justice, and I think that there are situations where that comes into play. You know, people serve their time, and within that they reform, right? And I think that's what we really all want. And I think a big problem in our society, and I'm sure you probably can speak highly to this or more to this, but the prison system and how it really is, it's not necessarily for that reform. We want rehabilitation. We don't often see that because the system is not fostering that. Whereas in other countries, you do see that. Places like Sweden,
Yeah.
I've heard a little bit about that. So anyway, I just wanted to I guess hit that point, that that's what, today's episode is about, is talking about, not necessarily about the nitty gritty details of that experience. People can look that up on their own if they want. What I wanted to speak with Jon about today is what was going on in his mind at the time. What was the psychology behind that experience, and what changed throughout his journey in life with Buddhist practice, through prison, and dig in deeper into that, because I think that's how we solve these issues. We talk about the cause, not just the symptoms, right? Not just the things that happened, but what was the cause of those events, and how can we stop future events like that from happening, and be there as support for other people.
Yeah.
And for me, like that, again, that's Buddhist practice, and for you, there, I'm sure it's that as well, but maybe other things. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that it's vitally important, like you said, is if we have a continuing, reoccurring problem, it feels like some people want a quick and easy solution, but unfortunately, we know that that's rarely ever the answer. And the answer to so many of the problems going on in society today, including the violence we see in our schools, does not have a quick and simple solution. Sometimes people want tangible, items or tangible things that they spend their money on. When I actually tell people a lot about social emotional learning programmings, I believe that putting those into school and allowing kids to be able to learn even just some of this mindfulness or
Mm-hmm.
meditation, right? Completely secular, but that gives people the tools and the techniques of how to be able to look at your mind and how it's working, and to realize that we don't have to get caught up in these emotions and thoughts that we have, because they are temporary.
Mm-hmm.
Just like how when we all begin meditating, that first 2 minutes, your brain is going wild. 5 minutes in, your brain is going wild. Hell, the first time, let's be honest, the entire meditation, your brain is going
Yeah.
wild,
Yeah.
right? But eventually we learn and we are able to see, like, oh crap, wait, I made it through 20 minutes or 30 minutes. And yeah, my brain might have been going crazy the entire time, but look at all the different things that my brain was thinking about throughout that 30 minutes. Like, nothing was like permanently just there the entire
Mm-hmm.
time. It's,
Mm-hmm.
you go from one thing to another, and it's monkey mind, right?
Yeah. Monkey mind.
But the more that we're able to teach ourselves this, and the more that we're able to teach, especially our young, this, the better that they are going to be able to have a hold over their actions following those thoughts and emotions. And I truly believe that, meditation has helped turn my life around on top of therapy. And, I believe that they work wonderfully in conjunction.
I
And,
agree.
that's one of the things that has made me the man who I am today. But I believe that doing that for children, for our adolescents and our teenagers who are going through a tumultuous time, not just in society, but dealing with the, family dynamics and puberty and all these different hormones
And
going out of
social media.
control. Social media, that wasn't
Yeah.
a thing when I was, a teenager.
Yeah.
I think that being able to sit back, looking at our thoughts and our emotions and realizing how temporary they are and not getting caught up in them allows us to be detached to a certain degree, but we also learn when to better engage as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That was very well said. I think everything you just said was, yeah, hit the nail on the head. Yeah. I mean, you had mentioned impermanence, and, I'm a big Buddhist philosopher. So for those listening, a Nietzsche, it means impermanence, and it is actually one of the three marks of existence in Buddhism, meaning that it's kind of like one of the three main components of the entire philosophy and practice. Everything is impermanent. And then to build on what you said as well, exactly. We use meditation to strengthen the faculty to be aware of those thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations as being impermanent, not here, and also not who we are, right? They are impermanent in nature. And what happens is we often attach ourselves to these feelings or these sensations, or we react to them. And the big part of Buddhist practice is becoming the observer, right? Letting them pass as they should, which is kind of interesting because in a way, our attachment to them prevents them from passing as they should. And we're fighting with this natural law that is impermanence. And so it's funny, we almost do it to ourselves in a lot of ways. And that's why the Buddhist practice is so self-liberating, because we are the ones changing, right? We're not leaning up to any outside force to give us that change. We are making those changes ourselves. And I think in a lot of ways, that's how or one of the reasons why I don't necessarily view it as a religion, at least specifically my practice, the Theravadan practice. It's very, very much a philosophy, psychology, and path. And just, art form. I like to call it an art form, or even a science on how to live life. So, yeah, very well said. And I think just to kind of build too on your point, social media and all these things, the more we can teach young people these strengths, these skills, just to be calm, just to have a calmer mind, to not react so quickly in that moment. So I guess as a transition, was there a point or a breakthrough when was it maybe in prison, or maybe a day or a week or a month, whatever, that you felt you started getting a grip on those emotions and those feelings?
Yeah. I think as far as getting a grip on my feelings and emotions, I'm still working on that, but
Yeah, same
I
here.
began doing a lot better. I definitely want to say that probably in my late 20s. So while I was in prison, as we touched on earlier, prison doesn't actually work towards rehabilitating people as much as we would like to think. However, I was able to get into a very rare program in New York State prisons, where basically they had us in a therapeutic community where we were housed only with other guys who were going through this very intense programming. We were getting like group therapy a couple times a week, self-help classes, what you would want prison to be like, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also at the same time, I'm working in conjunction with my meditation. But as I began to learn how to better not just understand what was going on within me, but to communicate what was going on within me. And I think that the meditation helped empower me to realize the different things within me that were really needing to be said and how to say them most appropriately. And when I was able to start communicating those emotions, those thoughts, feelings, and that voice in the back of your head that's like, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. But eventually I saw that even in prison, even in maximum security prison, I was able to get it to work where I was more in touch with myself. And by being more in touch with myself, I was also able to be more in touch with the people around me, even my fellow convicts, even the correctional officers who there's a love-hate relationship. Actually, I wouldn't even say love. There's a like-hate relationship with at times. But the more in touch I was with myself and everybody else around me, I was able to communicate that much better. And when I was able to express myself and have that expression be recognized and respected, even if somebody didn't agree with me, even if somebody wasn't like, yeah, you know, you're right, let me just do what you want to do. No, but at times people were able to respect it. And I was able to respect them, even when they disagreed with me. And that really, I think the meditation and the different teachings were able to bring that home for me. And when I was able to put that into practice, and really have that confidence in it. I recognize definitely towards my late 20s, you know, I'm now 37. So we're talking about 10 years ago, probably about a year or so into my real practice is when I started to really realize like, oh, wow, I'm feeling better. I'm doing better. And, you know, I'm also having better relationships with others, people around me.
Wow. That's great. Was there anything in particular about meditation that opened it up for you? Was it just the quiet space, or was it maybe compassion meditations, or what was it that allowed you to be more communicative?
That right there, I think, was when I was able to practice the, you know, the metta and the compassion on top of everything else. You know, forgiveness meditations were big for me because also when you're in prison, like I was there for doing something very horrible. And I had a lot of guilt and shame that weighed me down. And you know, it was eventually when I was able to work on forgiving myself, also while in therapy. And, you know, my therapist was the one telling me, like, forgiveness isn't saying that what you did is okay or that you shouldn't be held accountable. You know, forgiveness is basically saying that you're not going to hold on to that anger towards yourself or towards somebody else anymore. You're not going to allow that anger to direct the rest of your life. Wow. And so having that being told to me and then working in my quiet space, you know, first thing very early in the morning, I would fold up a blanket on my bed in my cell. And yeah, I would meditate on forgiveness and I would meditate on compassion for other people around me, starting off oftentimes with compassion for yourself. And then compassion for the ones you love, right? And then compassion for those who you like. And eventually even having, you know, the compassion practice towards the people that I hated, whether it was other prisoners, correctional officers, whoever, being able to go through that practice, it definitely allowed me to open myself up, not just my mind, but my heart as well.
That's beautiful, man. Getting chills over here. I think just for those who don't know, metta is a Pali word, which means it comes from the word mitta, which is friend. So metta means loving kindness, that of a friend. You know, that I describe it as that wonderful feeling you get when you haven't seen a friend in a long time and you just are so happy to be around them and you just give them a big hug. And so in Buddhism or in Theravadan Buddhist practice, it's one of the 4 divine abodes, which is a whole nother thing. I call them superpowers. But anyway, it's something you can practice and cultivate to exactly spread more love and compassion to people. And it has major effects on the self, on community, on others. And from a just a psych or biological perspective, I also strongly believe, and I don't know if there's studies to prove this, that when we do these things, when we meditate on love and compassion, we're actually building those neural networks in our brain, from a neuroplasticity perspective. So that way, when we go out in our daily lives, instead of maybe reacting with hate or anger or aversion, we're reacting with loving kindness. We're reacting with compassion. And understanding that everybody is human, everybody's going through their own experiences, and if we want to make the world a better place, we should start to foster that type of thinking. And then if I also may be so bold to say, and this is more of a theory, but I hope that as we do that more and more, future generations will start to have this already, embedded in their psyche as they grow up because of epigenetics. So that's my idea of like, how can we make the world a better place is, it starts with us. It starts with building these communities and these spaces together, and then, making more humans that are doing the same thing, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's wonderful the way you said it, because, you know, uh, yeah. And I would like to add in, when you talk about having compassion for others, when you're out on the streets, when you're going through your daily life, it's also realizing that sometimes compassion, doesn't necessarily have to be, well, let me say a kind word, let me do something for this individual. Sometimes compassion is just, I'm angry right now and I'm going to compassionately stay quiet. Because sometimes that is the right answer. We don't always have to speak up. We don't always have to do something. Sometimes in some circumstances, compassion is just recognizing I'm not in the right mind space. I wouldn't be able to react appropriately.
Yep.
Let me just walk away or keep quiet.
I love that. Yeah, and that's a good little I guess a segue or a connection I'm thinking of is, the difference between being a monk and a layman, right? A lot of people want to know, how can we be good laymen, because it's very difficult. It's very difficult. Exactly. You're walking down the street, you're paying your taxes, you're running into people that maybe are a little unkind towards you. Whereas if you're a monk in a monastery, typically everyone you're around are other monastics and other people who are there, part of your community and your sangha. So they're coming with that intention for either spiritual guidance or, with intention of compassion. And so I think that was a very well said, understanding how we're feeling and working, in this chaotic world with compassion is exactly, sometimes it's just being quiet, recognizing that anger, stopping ourselves from having what in the Eightfold Path is called wrong speech, right? Wrong thought, keeping our intention wholesome and to do good. One of the monks I studied with always said, to do good and not to do bad. He was a man from Thailand, and there was a little bit of a language barrier, and we would speak, in length about Buddhist practice, and that one's always stuck with me. It's very simple: to do good and not to do bad. So that would be staying quiet, would be doing that, right? Not to do bad, to refrain from that. So I think that's great. Are you still I mean, I know my meditation practice is fluctuates. Some days some weeks I'm great. Are you running into? Are you keeping your practice consistent? Is there anything you'd like to share about your current practice or anything like that?
Yeah. So my current practice, honestly, has been struggling. If you want, we can get into what happened to me after prison. And
I did want to touch on that as well. Yeah, I'd love to hear about that. Yeah.
So I'd been home from prison for about a year and a half, and I'd had different jobs, but eventually I literally quit my one job that I really enjoyed. I was working at a hotel, but I was like, you know what? Like, I'm just paying my bills, and it's nice, but I quit my job with nothing set up, just like, I have to do something more. And eventually I started volunteering at a homeless shelter, which I started to work at, and I loved it. But when you're working with the homeless population, there's a lot of mental health issues. There's a lot of drug addiction issues. There's, if somebody's not mentally ill or struggling, before you're homeless, spend a couple of weeks living on the street. You'll start to struggle. So I was working at the shelter, and so real quickly, one day somebody came in who, he wasn't a regular. I didn't know him, but he started to argue with one of my coworkers. And so some of my other coworkers and I just kind of stepped in, tried to de-escalate, let him know that, like, hey, we're here to help you out. Like, whatever you need, you want some lunch? We got you. Like, here's a place to sit. But up, down, all around, he's threatening, my coworkers, myself, other people. Eventually it's like, all right, you got to go, Okay. And again, like, you do this with compassion. You do this with letting him know, hey, you can come back tomorrow. we're not kicking you out here permanently or anything. It's just whatever is going on today. Like, we really hope that you can come back tomorrow and be a
Yeah.
little bit more respectful.
Yeah. He needs a second to calm
He,
down.
yeah, yeah. He needs a bit of time, and but for the safety and well-being of everybody, we asked him to leave. But we didn't have any security. We didn't have metal detectors. We didn't have none of that.
Ugh.
And so he went to the locker room where we have, people can lock their stuff up, and we don't know what's in there. He came out a couple minutes later with swords, and came straight for me, because I was the one that told him that he had to leave. And I almost lost my hands, both of them. I have, a severe nerve damage in both of my hands now. I almost lost my right leg from the knee down. He cut my kneecap in half. I won't go into the details. I'm sorry.
No,
But
it's okay.
needless to say, it's been 2.5 years now. He was sentenced to 25 years himself. I can also
Whoa.
speak on the fact that I was able to address him when he was sentenced, and I said something to him that nobody expected. I told him I forgave him. Because that's what the practice brings us to, is we learn what forgiveness is for the self. We learn what forgiveness is for others, and even those who we may strongly dislike or hate. And so it wasn't that hard for me to forgive him, because I knew forgiveness I wasn't saying that he shouldn't be held accountable. I want him to be held accountable, but I also told him, I want you to get the help that you need. I've been in the prisons you are going to. And I want you to find the people who are turning their lives around or who have turned their lives around. And I want you to do the same. And I didn't tell everybody that day, but in court, I quoted, well, who knows if it really comes from the Buddha? There's so many misquotes, but I said to him that one of my favorite quotes is that to hold on to anger is like holding on, or is like to drink poison and expect the other to suffer. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And so that's why I was able to forgive him and wish him well. Now, it's been, like I said, 2.5 years just about since that attack. And, life can be hard at times. I'm now disabled. I can't go to work anymore. I deal with a lot of pain. And so it is a struggle. And to bring this back to how is my practice today? It fluctuates ever since the attack, because some days I meditate on, just the sensations of breath as it comes and goes. And I try not to focus in on anything else, but, thoughts and emotions come and go. But some days it's a lot harder, and especially I do meditations on physical pain. Right. That's actually one of the big instructions that I've been given by some teachers who are more into Theravada. And so I'll tell people, anybody out there, if you're a chronic pain sufferer, or you're somebody who's going through a hard time physically, my hands are, it can be very painful at times. Nerve damage is very painful. But at the same time, it's like, so then there's different meditations of, well, how is the rest of my body feeling, right? Recognizing that the pain is not always present everywhere, because it's present in one place. And it's not even consistently there. It ebbs and flows. It comes and goes. And so sometimes I meditate on that. And a lot of days I just get caught up in, excuse my language, but some days I get caught up in fuck this, and just being like, oh man, fuck this. I just want to be disillusioned again. I just want to just say, fuck it. Like, let me just mindlessly scroll through TikTok, watch TV, and do anything to distract me from the mental and physical pain that I go through. I get caught up in that some days, some weeks, some months. But as one of my teachers told me, our meditation on the cushion and off the cushion is very similar. When we're on the cushion, our mind wanders. And eventually you just have to bring yourself back. Not with judgment, not with any type of harsh criticisms about yourself. It's best to
Yeah.
just be like, oh shit. Again, excuse my language. Oh,
You're fine.
let me bring myself back to the breath or whatever I'm meditating on. And they tell me, if you're gone for days, weeks, or months, it's okay. Don't judge yourself. Just say, oh,
I love that.
I need to meditate again. I need to bring myself back to the meditation. And so that's a long answer to your question, but there it
No,
is. That's what my
no.
practice has been lately.
Well, thank you. Yeah, man, I'm incredibly sorry that that happened to you, and I just want you to know I am extending a hand of condolence to you right now, and thank you for sharing that with us. And that was a very powerful story. I was getting emotional over here, and I even, for those who are watching on YouTube, I did the Thai Y, and I always find myself doing that whenever I hear true compassion, true love, true liberation from suffering, in those moments, whether it be words of the Buddha or from someone's personal experience where their practice helped them in that way. It's kind of me like kind of extending almost like a thank you to the practice, to the Dhamma itself, to these teachings that teach us we don't have to suffer, And yeah, I think that's beautiful, man. I think that what you said is not heard of ever. Like, I don't think I've ever heard, maybe one person have I heard forgive somebody who did something to them, like in a courtroom like that. I think I've heard one story. So you are now like the second. So I just wanted to say, like, I think that's incredible. And based on this entire conversation, what we've been talking about, that's what we're talking about here. Fighting the cause, stopping suffering at its source, uprooting it, stopping more suffering, because you could have flipped, you could have easily done the opposite and been more angry and gone out and hurt someone else, but, or hurt him or his family, whatever. Right. And so I want to also thank you for that, not just for sharing, but for being that person. I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, it's all about breaking the cycle, right?
Yep.
Because in Buddhism, we call it samsara. And I was caught up in that myself. I still get caught up in it. But when we recognize it, when we see what samsara truly is, and we see this revolution of just mindlessness that we're continuously stuck up in, and it's also whether I have a lot of friends who are in addiction and recovery, it's very similar. But it's all about, can we break out of this cycle, even if just for one moment or for just one circumstance? I might have other circumstances in my life where somebody does something minor to me, and then I'm like, get all upset with them. Whereas I forgave somebody who tried to end my life. But yeah, I think
Oh,
that's,
wow.
like you said, it's what the practice is all about, because I like to use sports analogies with this. Like, I grew up, I love playing baseball. And it's kind of like when you're in the batting cages, you're just learning how to swing at the ball. You're learning how to make contact. There's no actual game. There's nothing else going on you. It's a controlled environment. And when we meditate, it's a controlled environment where you're not interacting with people. You're not dealing with everything. You're just in this controlled environment practicing. And what is practice for? It's for when you're in the game, when you're in real life, when you're interacting with people on the day-to-day basis. How are you going to interact when you are with these people in everyday moments, whether it's just mundane, going to work, dealing with bills, dealing with family, or yes, even somebody trying to hurt you or end your life? How are you going to handle that? And the more you practice, the better you can handle that.
I love that. Yeah, I have a similar analogy. It's like the dress rehearsal versus the performance.
Exactly.
Meditation is the rehearsal, and how can we actually do it out in the our daily lives? Wow. Yeah, that is just powerful, man. Gotta like take a second to process that. Yeah. Well, let's see what else. Thinking if there's any other thoughts. I mean, I feel like we've covered so much. Yeah, is there anything else that you're thinking right now or would like to share? Or
I mean, I think one of the most important things for people to realize is that with Buddhism and different practices, it's all about exploration. I think it's important for everybody to be free to explore, whether it's these different ideologies, theologies, religions, etc. Um, you know, and I think it's important for people to also be able to explore themselves. Where does this fit in? How does it fit in? And if it doesn't fit in, why does it not fit in? Why am I struggling with this? What is it that I'm resisting? Because sometimes those are the best teachers, is why something doesn't seem to fit in with us. And it doesn't mean that you have to force it in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just means that it is something in which you can learn from. And so I think that for your listeners, if they are not Buddhist practitioners, if they're not into meditation, but they're simply listening because they're curious, and or maybe they're just listening because they follow you on TikTok and they want to hear what more you're doing on here. Or the same thing if people are following me and they're just kind of curious about more about my story with Buddhism, because I don't really talk about this stuff on social media too much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's important for everybody to be able to just explore these different things and explore yourself, and do so without harsh criticisms. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, I
I don't
love
know.
that. That's something that's always drawn me to the practice, is exactly what you just said. I mean, there are no blind faiths. You actually cannot be a good practicing Buddhist by blindly believing, the teachings. You have to put them into play. You have to explore them. And in that process, you explore yourself. And I look at them almost as like guardrails or guide rails kind of that are, kind of guiding you. But exactly, I mean, Buddhism has never said this is the only path, this is the right path, everything else is wrong, right? And I think that's a theme I also see in a lot of Eastern practices. And so I think that open-mindedness is what pulled me in. And as I started to discover it more, I started reading, texts like the Abhidhamma, which is the third basket of the Pali Canon. For anybody who doesn't know what the Pali Canon is, it's the original teachings of the Buddha that were written down a couple hundred years after he passed away. And the Abhidhamma reads like a scientific textbook. It's very, it feels like a science. So without going into too much detail about it, that was what excited me. And yeah, man, I just, again, want to commend your practice. I know, like you said, some days are better than others. Same with me. I think same with pretty much everybody, even the most, skilled monks. Not to mention, for those who are getting into Buddhism, who have been into it, regardless, if whatever, as a layman, we know that it can also be difficult. And so leaning on our practice in those tough times. And yeah, man, I was expecting this to go longer, but I'm being called to pull it to a close. If that's okay with you, of course. If is there anything we wanted to cover? I mean, I'm thinking of all the different things. I'm like, I feel like we covered pretty much everything that I was hoping to cover. Your journey, your practice, how it changed in prison. And yeah, I just, want to extend another thank you to being a beacon of compassion, understanding the truth of suffering, understanding your own suffering, and then working towards not only liberating yourself from your own suffering, but now trying to be a role model to others that are experiencing similar suffering, and showing them that there is a way to find peace and not, hurt others in the process, and not by blindly doing it either, right? By actually looking within. And I think that's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah. I mean, I think one other thing I would like to touch on is maybe looking forward, right? And in looking forward, I want to remind people that there's also, in Buddhism, we call it engaged Buddhism. And we can be fully active out there, fighting against injustices and sticking up for what we believe is right, and trying to make the world and make our society a better place. And we can get caught up in the hostile nature of some of the political world that we see around us. And as we have the new administration coming in, I see a lot of protests and like that in the future.
Yeah, definitely.
For one side or the other. And I'll just tell people that although I myself get amped up when I talk about some of these things, sometimes it's good to talk kind of like very animatedly and aggressive. But for the most part, like, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down for a lot of people. You're not going to convince any of your family, friends, coworkers, people on the internet by yelling at them and putting them down and talking trash to them. You are more likely going to help people open up their minds and their hearts by, yes, going out there, speaking out against what you believe is wrong, but doing so with that compassion, doing so with metta, because, simply calling somebody, horrible names is not going to help anything.
Yeah.
But I hope that those who are interested in going out and calling for change can do so, as, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe like aggressively compassionate as possible, if
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah, yeah,
sense.
yeah. No, I
Right?
think that's such a great point, and that's something I hit home a lot too on my page, because I think we can be engaged, we can be active, but we can do so with compassion and non-attachment, right? I often tell people there's a difference, right, between detachment and non-attachment. Detachment is more like nihilism, right, removing ourselves from the situation, which some people do, right? I just don't care about anything anymore, right? On the flip side, we have attachment, right, which is gripping on so aggressively, suffering ourselves, potentially reacting in ways that cause pain to others, whether it be anger or even physical experiences or physical actions. So our goal is to find that balance, right? In Buddhism, this is called the middle way, non-attachment. So what that means is still being present, still being 100% there, fighting for what is right, fighting for injustices, but doing so in a way where we don't suffer ourselves, and we also, in that way, come in with a clearer and calmer mind. We can make actions more effectively, more efficiently. We can stand up for what's right and speak more eloquently without like exactly harming others or doing harsh speech. And that, in my opinion, is also the best way, because you're right. Because that's, I guess in my opinion, and what you said too, is really the only way that someone on the other side is going to listen to you. Exactly. If you're yelling in their face and you're angry and you're hurting them in different ways with harmful speech or action, what makes them want to listen to you? If anything, they're going to dig their heels in even deeper. So if somebody really wants change, we have to approach it, in my opinion, with compassion and non-attachment, so that way we can actively engage them as well as ourselves still in finding a middle ground, right? And sometimes people also, I hate to say it, but some people need to be taught. They need to be taught what compassion is. Some people were not taught that at a young age, and that's why cultivating it ourselves is really important, and speaking about it and trying to come in the middle together through that non-attachment, through that compassion, and through that engaged Buddhism, which is a very famous movement that anyone listening, check it out. It's very popular, and I love that. Moving forward with that non-attachment. Oh, one other thing too, the quote you had mentioned earlier, I don't know if it's the same one, but I just wanted to tell you, the one I know of is the Buddha said, anger is like throwing a hot coal at somebody far away that you can't even reach them. The only one that gets burned is you. 'Cause you're holding that hot coal, you're throwing it, you're trying to get at them, but they're too far, you're not even going to make it anyway. You're the one with the burn on your hand, right?
Yeah. Oh, I like it. Thank you for sharing that. I don't think I've heard that one. I like that.
Yeah. Oh man, the parables are some of my favorites. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was something like that. I might have butchered it a little, but
Oh, trust me, I butcher them all the time, right? But we do our best.
yeah, we do our best. Yeah, man. Well, John, this has been very, very enlightening. No pun intended. Pun intended. And I just want to thank you again. Do you want to? What's your? If you want to share your TikTok handle or any other socials that people can find you at?
Yeah. So I go by the same name everywhere on social media. I go by Jon Seeking Peace. My name is spelled Jon Seeking Peace. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Come and find me.
Beautiful. Well, thanks again, John. This has been a wonderful episode. This is Passing Moments of Existence with Bradley Marcus's and Jon Romano. And may you be well today. May you be at peace, and may you be free of suffering. And we'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks for being here.